Yeah, well, it's contagious.
Well, and Marissa, get up here, Marissa. Where's Marissa Verino? Where's Marissa Verino? Get up here. So Marissa sent me an email probably about 190 days ago, saying you sponsored Bruce Schwab on a sailboat around the world, and there's a gentleman that's in Portland Harbor looking to sail around the world again, Ronnie Simpson. And cheers.
Cheers.
And she said, she didn't make out that she was in love with him. She didn't say anything about being involved with him. She didn't say any of that. And she showed up here and said, what do you think about sponsoring? I said, well, I don't know. We might be able to donate some beer, do that type of thing. And then I met Ronnie at $3 Dewey's, and then met Ronnie again and heard his whole story. And honestly, I thank God you're here with us now, and I'm still kind of crazy that you want to keep doing this, sailing around the world, and try to do, and ultimately do the Vendée race again sometime maybe in the next 4 to 8 years. So tonight is about hearing your story and letting you talk about what it was like to be out there, because we get to see you through 18 episodes of what it was like to sail around the world alone. And we didn't get that with you. I got a few emails, and you made it around the world. The world's changed. But
20 years ago, Fred.
20 years ago, which is hard to believe. We're not that old, though. No. But I thank God you made it around the world and finished one of the first Americans to make it around the world in the Vendée race alone with a very tight budget. Here's to you, Bruce. Cheers. And Ronnie, honestly, what you accomplished, and I know it wasn't everything you wanted to be, but based on what you were up against and what you dealt with, we truly thank God you made it back, and you're here to talk about your journey, and I'll let you have the microphone. But Marissa, thank you for all you did to help make it happen. And it's a true American love story, and it'll lead from there. So see where it goes. Cheers. Mike's yours.
Thank you so much, Fred. And I just want to thank, obviously, Fred and Marissa, but also everyone that's here, and Bruce as well. Bruce helped out a lot. But just thank you, everyone, for showing up to hear this story and to support this campaign and to support Shipyard Brewing. So again, massive thanks to Shipyard. But I got a pretty long presentation, so I'm going to get going.
Thank you.
That's unbelievable, right? So this story, this whole thing, this Global Solo Challenge campaign, it started in the summer of 2022. And so I'm not from Portland, Maine. I had never even been to Portland, Maine when this whole thing started, but I got connected to this boat that was in this place called Portland, Maine. So a friend of mine named Whitehall Stokes, who is the taller gentleman in the khaki pants, I had actually raced against him solo to Hawaii back in 2012. And we had become friends, we had stayed in touch, and he had bought this boat called an Open 50, and he had sailed it himself. He wanted to go around the world solo nonstop. He went from California out around Hawaii. He went to Cape Horn, had some issues, stopped into Chile, and then went to Charleston and up to Maine, and that was all during COVID. And so he had brought the boat up to Maine Yacht Center because of its reputation of being this world-class place to work on a race boat. And so he brought the boat to Maine Yacht Center and decided that he wanted to pass the torch. And a boat like that's kind of interesting, and didn't really sell super quickly, and he wanted to see someone do this race, and he offered me the boat and no money to go race around the world in this race called the Global Solo Challenge. And so my friend Whitehall reached out to me with this like really basic email in 2022, and I had a lot going on in my life, and I was like, yes, I will drop everything and take your boat and no money and go race around the world, because that's my dream. So after I finished up my work obligations in Hawaii, I booked a ticket to Portland, Maine, and I flew one of my good buddies out here, Sean Doyle, who's a professional sailor from Hawaii, and we met up with Whitehall and we put the boat together, we put the sails on, and we started sailing the boat here in Portland, Maine in August of 2022, the end of August 2022. And started sailing the boat and got it going, and I raised a bit of money and crowdfunded, sourced some money, and kind of just put the very, very beginnings of this campaign together of just like at least taking the boat and beginning to sail it, and just like one day at a time, trying to figure out how to get to the start line of the Global Sailing Challenge. And just to put it in perspective, when we started in August of 22, I had 14 months to make it to the start. The start was in October of last year, 23. And so here's like day one after sailing the boat. That's in the back cove by Maine Yacht Center. Kind of getting some feedback here. And then this is in September. First thing we had to do was like, winter was coming, autumn was coming, so we had to start getting down the coast. So I took the boat down to Newport, which worked out well because it was the Newport Boat Show in September. So this was the first passage from Maine to Newport, Rhode Island. It's pretty light and pretty mellow. And then I got to the Newport Boat Show, and again, the whole theme was that like I had this boat and I had this dream and I had no money. So went to the boat show, walked around, ran into a bunch of old business contacts, old sailing contacts, and linked up with like New England Ropes, with Shard, Facnor, Ronstan, companies like that, where I already knew all the reps from working in the industry as a rigger, and like pulled all these sponsors in, almost day one. And then we were starting to get like some free ropes and some free blocks and some free hardware, and like starting to get what we could to just start putting this thing together and continue moving the ball forward. At the same time, I had to continue moving the boat down the coast because winter was trying to creep in. So this is the editor and an old friend of mine. For those that don't know, I do a lot of freelance sailing journalism and sailing media. And so that's an old friend of mine. That's Herb McCormick. He's the editor of Cruising World magazine. And in the back of the boat, in the red life jacket, is Dave Reed. He's the editor of Sailing World magazine. And so I was lining up some press for the boat. We took the boat out, ripped around with some magazine editors. And right here, the gentleman in the white long sleeve shirt is the director of a veteran sailing nonprofit, U.S. Patriot Sailing. And that will figure into the story a little bit later. And these are a couple of guys in Maine. I think Nathaniel will recognize them, but that's Seth and Brett. And so basically I had kind of befriended them when I was in Portland with the boat, and they drove down to Newport to help me sail the next leg down to New York. And that was the first time kind of going upwind in the boat. And we sailed upwind in like 15 to 20 knots all the way to New York. Had a really, really great trip, learned a lot about the boat, and the whole time I was just learning about the boat with other people on board before I sailed it solo. And like not everything was working day one as well, so it was really good to have a couple of other hands as we figured out the boat and got things dialed in. And sailed on to New York. Had a really nice sail. That was the sunset. And when you're sailing to New York on that point of sail in that wind direction, you're kind of like sheltered by Long Island. So it's kind of flat water going upwind. And it was actually a really, really absolutely beautiful sail into New York. And then that was entering into the Hudson and entering into New York. And when I was there, I was in Liberty Landing, which is right by the Statue of Liberty, right across from Manhattan. And so like we ended up doing some sailing, and all these photos are drone photos. So like as you're sailing the boat, you're trying to put the drone up, and there's 10 airports around you, and there's all these things, and you're like, I think if I take the drone off right now, we land it in 2 minutes, I think it's good. And it managed to work. So we actually got some cool Statue of Liberty drone shots and all that. I'm a drone enthusiast and sailing media guy, so there's a lot of drone shots. And it was really, really fun sailing the boat in Manhattan, which like things come up very quickly when you're doing 10 or 12 knots the whole time. But it was a really, really cool place to sail. Took some sponsors out, picked up some more sponsors, found a couple of like private donors as well in New York, and just like day by day tried to like grow this interest. And the whole time I was looking for a title sponsor. I had this boat and I had no money. So it's like, it was great. I was getting some free rope, and I was getting some free this and free that. And I was raising a little bit of money here and there to keep things going, but I had to quit my job and sell my cruising boat and sell all my things, and I had to like jump into this 100%. So every day it was about just trying to find the money to get to the start line of the race and to try to put this thing together day by day. And after New York, we sailed down to Annapolis, and we timed it really, really well. We came down the coast on a northeasterly, that was the remnants of a hurricane. So we were downwind down the coast, and then we hit the entrance of the Chesapeake, and the wind was transitioning to a southerly, so then we took a kite up the Chesapeake. And like, we really nailed that one, and I was super proud of my navigation on there. So we came all the way into Annapolis under a spinnaker, and I managed to finagle the boat into the Annapolis Boat Show, which is like the biggest boat show in the US. So we got the boat on the dock, and we were like, from that tight slip, we were using a dinghy to help hip tie to us and pull us out. Sketchiest maneuver ever. But we were getting the boat in and out, going sailing with sponsors. We signed up, like West Marine became a big sponsor, and they signed up there because of that. Facnor, the guy from France, like shook my hand, and he's like, we're gonna give you 20 grand in furloughs, like at the boat show. And Alstrom Sales came on board from Denmark. So I really like just bootstrapped this thing and found a bunch of sponsors at the boat shows, Newport and Annapolis. And it was really, really, good to get the boat in front of a lot of people and just to spread this story of like, this is what we're doing, this is my background, this is what I'm doing with the boat, this is what we need, etc. And we were lining up with a lot of enthusiastic companies in the marine industry. And it was really something incredible. It's just how many good people there are in the marketing departments of companies in the marine industry that they just say, this is cool, we love what you're doing, we want to support it. We don't have any cash, but here's free blank. And just put that together piece by piece while we tried to also find some funding. And this was a really rewarding day of the campaign where we took out like 18 kids from the Bronx, and they've got like an after school program where they all go sailing and they learn about boat building and conservation and a lot of other very worthwhile topics. But this is a group called Rockin' the Boat Bronx, and we took them out and we were ripping. It was supposed to be blowing 5 and it was blowing like 13. And so we were ripping around the Chesapeake with like 20 high school kids. And we had them driving the boat, and everyone had a blast. I was so stressed out. We were a bit over canvassed, and I was just trying to manage the boat. We had like 20 people on board. I was like, this is chaos. But all's well that ends well. So we also lined up some media stuff. I had Sailing World and Cruising World do some articles, and Sail Magazine did some coverage, and this was just one of the photos with a professional photographer who's a really, really cool guy named John Whittle. And there's also the other side of the campaign. Again, as I stressed, I was the campaign with no money, a guy with a dream trying to make it happen. So I was living on my open 50 on a mooring ball in November in Maryland. So that's just a little like photo of what it was like. There were times where I would make tea at night just to keep warm because there was no heater on the boat. I didn't have any shore power. I was like on this 50-foot race boat, and my keel was too deep to get into any docks in Annapolis. But the boat was now owned by U.S. Patriot Sailing. It had now been donated, and so it was owned by a nonprofit, a veteran nonprofit based in Annapolis. And for those that don't know, I'm a combat wounded and retired Iraq War veteran and Marine. So teaching sailing to veterans and introducing veterans to offshore racing is something very, very near and dear to my heart, and something that really has impacted my life so positively with sailing. So I do a lot with veterans of sailing, and that's why we were in Annapolis, was with U.S. Patriot. And again, this is so that now we're like working on the boat, and we're trying to actively improve the boat every day. So getting a bunch of cordage from New England ropes and turning that into running rigging, and just trying to put this boat together on a nickel and a dime and a shoestring. And so here's one of our actually last shots of Sparrow at the time in Annapolis. We left after Thanksgiving 2022 just to get, again, to warmer weather. So had an absolutely beautiful sail down the coast from Annapolis to Beaufort, North Carolina, which is a place that really stole my heart. Really awesome sailing town. If you're ever doing deliveries or cruising up and down the East Coast, like go into Beaufort. Really, really charming little town. And I ended up spending the winter there, 2022 into 2023. But this was coming around Cape Hatteras. So Cape Hatteras, for the non-sailors in the crowd, Cape Hatteras is one of the most notorious places on the East Coast. It's a place where you can really get some very challenging weather, and it's really good to come around Cape Hatteras in fairly moderate conditions. And we had fantastic conditions downwind. We had a spinnaker up, beautiful sunset, and we had the most phenomenal dolphin shows I've seen. Some of the best I've ever seen anywhere. It was phenomenal. Absolutely beautiful sailing. And this is a good buddy of mine named Ed McCoy. He joins me on the trip from Annapolis to North Carolina, and he also joins me on the trip from here to Spain before the start of the race. So good buddy of mine, and it's just a good shot at him as we were going down to Beaufort. And kind of like, this is what I'll always remember about Beaufort, was that I was just on this end dock because of my size and draft, but I was just this very, very peaceful dock right there on this creek in the wintertime. It was the low season. You had the stunning sunsets with a lot of wildlife coming through the creek there. And I hung out on the dock, and it was a cheap place to work on the boat for 4 months. And it just ended up being like in one of those situations in life where I was never headed to Beaufort, but then I somehow ended up there for 4 months, and the town really took me in. Really, really special place. And just a little bit of sailing in Beaufort, but while I was in Beaufort, one of the reasons I ended up there is because on the way from Annapolis to Beaufort, the engine started making a relatively disconcerting noise, and I did not like the noise at all. Couldn't quite figure out what it is. So I pulled the motor out. It wasn't what I thought it was, so I put the motor right back in. And then we had to pull the rig out because the boat had never had working wind instruments since I had got the boat. So we were coming down from Maine to Rhode Island to New York to Annapolis to North Carolina. We did all that with no wind instruments because they weren't working. So I pulled the rig out just to rewire everything and put new wind instruments in and redo the antenna for the VHF radio and all that. So I pulled the rig out, which is there's so many stories that like it's a whole other story in its own right. But also pulled the motor out, and then this is no rig, and did a lot of other work at the same time. But then it was, once the rig was back in, we motored the boat to and from the port because there's no boat yard. We actually had to use a big port, and they used a massive crane. But the port commander was a retired Marine colonel, and he knew I was like a medically retired Iraq veteran getting ready to race around the world. I think he charged me like $500 to pull the rig in and out. But there were like 10 people working for at least 2 hours with like safety vests and a huge crane. I got a really sweetheart deal working on the boat in Beaufort. Morehead City action. That's the boat with no rig though. And then I had to figure out what was going on with the motor. And I looked at getting a new motor, and to change the motor would have been cost prohibitive, and then to get a new direct replacement of the motor was kind of sort of doable, but I couldn't get one in less than 3 months. And I said, well, this can't delay me for 3 months, but I can't run the motor with the noise that it's making. So I had no other option, but I pulled the motor back out a second time, and then I took it to a friend's house in the back of a rental car, and I just ripped it down to a bare block. I had no idea what I was doing, but I grew up riding dirt bikes, so I said, I'm gonna go for it. It's a tractor motor, it can't be that hard. So I ripped it down to a bare block, and sure enough, I found a spun rod bearing. So the lower rod bearing on the forwardmost connecting rod is a 3-cylinder motor. So the forwardmost of those 3 cylinders had spun the lower rod bearing, and that perfectly explains the noise I was hearing. So I went right into a full rebuild, and I had a mechanic come look over my shoulder a few times, but I put the motor back together myself and put it back in the boat. Never had a single issue with it. So, and on that note, as a theme of this story, I was the kid with no money and the big dreams. So I was rebuilding the motor, and Beta Marine, their marketing guy, Jimmy, he sponsored the campaign, and they came in with like free connecting rod, free pistons, free rings, free gaskets, all that. So and free bearings. So the boat ended up needing a crankshaft as well because the machine shop messed up my crankshaft. But they sponsored like all that stuff, minus the crankshaft at the end. So big shout out to Beta. And then that was some new chain plates. So I did find the forward chain plate that holds the headstay was old. I knew it was old, and I didn't like how it looked. That I had, like, you had to take it out of the boat. It was really difficult. So once you took it out of the boat, you'd be dumb not to replace it. So I did the forward chain plate, and then I did the side chain plates, and then I did the back chain plates, and I did some other stuff. So I did all my chain plates in North Carolina as well, one at a time with the mast held up just by ropes for like most of the winter. But then in the end, by April 1st, I had the boat sailing again, and we were doing I called it spring training, you know? It was April 1st, and the boat was now up and going, where the autopilot works, the charging systems were more robust, the boat had new chain plates, the wind instruments worked, the motor was rebuilt, etc. A lot of improvements, excuse me. And that was us like sailing right into Taylor Creek, right in front of the dock, and I've been keeping this close to the chest for a year, but we ran aground right after that photo was taken. So my boy put me in a bad position. Oh, you got plenty of water, you got plenty of water. We had a 12.5-foot keel, and we didn't have plenty of water. The only place I ever ran the boat aground was within 100 feet of that dock right there. Happened a couple times. And then, so I left on, I think it was like April 10th of last year, I left Beaufort, and I went on my first solo sail. It was time to start sailing the boat solo, whereas before I had no wind instruments and everything else, and like, it was challenging and I was learning the boat, but now it was time to sail the boat solo. So I sailed solo from Beaufort down to Charleston. Everything went pretty smoothly. And here's like the boat's starting to take shape. I installed that race car seat as well behind the nav table, but you can see the interior of the boat at night. On the port side there, that's like the galley. It's just a freeze-dried little jet boil deal. And there's bunks on either side, and then there's the nav table in front of the race car seat. And that's just looking the other way, just looking out. And that's Sparrow down in Charleston. And I had a really good time in Charleston, and I was hoping to do some sailing there, but there's a lot of current both ways in Charleston, and I did not like that dock at all. I did not want to be on that dock if it got windy. It was just, it damaged the boat, and with how deep my keel was, 12.5 feet, there's just so few places I could go with the boat. So sometimes I'd end up somewhere and I'm like, I gotta get out of here. Like, this is gonna damage the boat. So I only stayed there a few days, and then I took off and I went back north and that was the plan, was just to go to Charleston and then go north. So I went from Charleston and I went north to Annapolis. I had to go back to Annapolis for a bit. And so it was my first time like actually kind of seeing some breeze in the boat solo. I came around Cape Hatteras in 25 knots solo. And then after that, went into the Chesapeake, and then the winds, I had like 25 knots from the north into Annapolis, and I was short tacking up the Chesapeake solo at night, and I had to stay awake for 46 hours straight. You couldn't go to sleep, because if you went to sleep, like something bad was going to happen. So just with that close of land on both sides, and with how many fishing boats there were and everything else inside the Chesapeake, between Cape Hatteras and Annapolis was 46 hours of no sleep, which was really mentally challenging. But I made it back to Annapolis, no dramas, no problems, and I had a lot of confidence from doing 1,000 miles solo on the boat, and it was really, really good training. And then I had work that I was going to do in Annapolis before I did my mandatory 2,000-mile qualifier. So when the boat was in Annapolis, like I said, I could not get onto a dock anywhere, except for one spot, which was like a loading dock only, but you would not stay there. And so I was on a mooring ball, basically right in front of the Naval Academy, and I had a skiff, and I just went in and out. And as a retired Marine, I used the Naval Academy a lot. It was really cool to get the Naval Academy. Exceptionally cool place. I really, really enjoyed Annapolis. And then one thing we did in Annapolis was we took on a whole new inventory of sails. So as I mentioned, I had Elfstrom Sails from Denmark. They came on board to sponsor the campaign, and so we took on a whole inventory of new sails, and we pulled along the dock to load those and had to get back to the mooring ball because it was only a loading dock. It was super sketchy. And then on the mooring ball, we put on a new forestay and a new furler, a whole structural furler setup and a whole new forestay, and it was a lot of work happened on a mooring wall that would typically happen in a boatyard, but no money. So this was the first sail with the new sails in Annapolis. And then we actually, I did a lot of sailing with both US Patriot Sailing, taking a lot of veterans out, but also taking the kids out of the boat show. But also this was the Downtown Sailing Center in Baltimore. Really, really cool group in Baltimore, Downtown Sailing Center. We took a bunch of kids out and had a fantastic time, just sharing the sport with some really, really nice kids. You know, it's all about I think like the youth and the next generation and getting more young people inspired in the sport is something I believe very much in. So it was really cool to go sailing with Downtown Sailing Center. And then it was time to go in my qualifier because I had to go do a 2,000 mile mandatory qualifier before a certain date, which is why I did not plan to go solo to Europe. I planned to do my qualifier into the boatyard in Maine and then go to Europe either solo or with Ed. So I left Annapolis, and that's a photo that a friend of mine took. I left pretty early in the morning, but I'm under full sail, just close reaching out of Annapolis, and then going up the bay. And I went to Solomon's Island, Maryland, which is about halfway down the Chesapeake. I stopped there for 2 days and worked on the boat, and then I took off in the middle of the night. At midnight, I took off to go on my qualifier, and mostly had light air down the bay, and then it died, and then I was like upwind out the actual entrance of the Chesapeake, and this is the entrance of the Chesapeake right here. That I was leaving the Chesapeake this time, and then we had mostly light air, but I had a really nice spinnaker run to Bermuda, so I ran out to Bermuda and doing like 200 miles a day or something. It wasn't very windy, so went through the other two Code Zeros. That's one of the old spinnakers, not the new ones, but still a good sail. And so really played with all the downwind sails and learned the boat. And then I went around Bermuda. It turns to upwind, but then I was like reaching from Bermuda back to Port, Rhode Island. And it was the first time that I saw some like heavy weather on the boat. I had 25 knots kind of on a reach coming back from Bermuda. And I had thunderstorms in the Gulf Stream that I saw 35 knots of breeze one night, and I saw up to 45 the next night. So it was kind of nice. Like I was really, the whole time as I was doing this, I was gradually seeing more and more intense conditions, and I was kind of ramping up my sailing of the boat. And I had some really intense thunderstorms that were meteorologically very, very, very interesting. Coming back from Bermuda, it was some really fascinating weather. Very intense squalls, but yeah, it was fantastic sailing. I had a great run from Bermuda back to Newport. And I made it from Bermuda back to Newport, and I went maybe 20 miles outside of Newport, and then I tacked out and I went downwind around the Nantucket Shoals and up into the Gulf of Maine because I had a requirement to reach 2,000 miles. So I couldn't go straight to Portland. I had to go sail a bunch of extra miles. And so as I was sailing these extra this big low pressure came into the Gulf of Maine, kind of formed out of nowhere. And so I was able to go mostly on southwesterlies. I got myself to the northeast, really close to Nova Scotia. And then as the wind got really intense, I was able to turn downwind. And I came by Penobscot Bay doing like 20 knots in the middle of the night. And it was blowing 50. I did not think I was going to see 50, but I saw 54 knots in that system. I saw 54 knots in the Gulf of Maine, and I was freezing even in June. It was super cold. So I did not expect that, but I had this crazy intense situation right here in the Gulf of Maine, but I made it into Maine with no problems. I had no problems at all. I pulled in after my 2,000 mile qualifier. I pulled right onto the dock at high tide at Maine Yacht Center, docked the boat. Zero dramas. So I had at that point I had so much confidence that I sailed 300 miles solo, that I sailed 600 miles solo. We put new sails on. We did the qualifier. Nothing's broken. We saw 50 knots. We saw 40 knots. We saw 30 knots. It was very confidence inspiring to go knock out some miles on the boat. And then as soon as I got back to the Yacht Center, I believe it was June 20th of last year. And the former owner of the boat, the gentleman who loaned me the boat and then donated the boat, the guy from the beginning of the story, Whitehall, who is the taller gentleman in jeans, He was here in the area, so he met me at the boat. And then I also had this new friend named Chris. They were just walking the boat show, and he kind of saw my boat, and he's like, "This is an old round the world boat from the 90s. Like, what are you doing?" And I told him what I was doing, and he's like, "Do you need any help?" And I said, "Yeah, I need all the help I can get." So he goes, "All right, well, I'm going to come help you in Portland, Maine, all summer." And I had just met the guy, and I'm like, "Yeah, sure you are, bud." So I never thought I was going to see him again. And sure enough, Chris and I stayed in touch, and we talked on the phone 2 times and emailed. And then as soon as I got to Maine, he was up here to help on the boat. So this is like the day after I arrived. I've got Whitehall and Chris there to help me out, and we're removing the sails from the boat, and we're getting the boat ready to take it apart at Maine Yacht Center, which is just right down the road from here. And so this is a couple days later, and this is the mast off the boat. So we pulled the mast out so the riggers could measure everything and order the parts and spec everything so they could start building the new standing rigging and doing any preparation that needed to be done to the masts. And then we did some more work to the boat, and then we were planning to pull the boat out of the water. And there's a photo of Chris, who was basically like my one guy throughout the most of the campaign. I was alone with no money. I didn't have money to hire a shore crew. I was just every day trying to figure out how to get to the start line. And so Chris was like a godsend. I mean, he came in and helped me out so much for over a month last summer, and then again in Spain. And so this was right when we pulled the boat out of the water, and then it went into the shed at Maine Yacht Center. And so the photo on the left, as you can see, I'm standing down the hall getting for bottom paint. And then in the middle of the photo is the mast was out. The mast was also in the shed so that the riggers could measure it and begin speccing the new rigging and everything for the mast. And then also on the right, you can see Chris built a really cool nav table. He was like a Finnish carpenter, and he built a nav table. It was one of the first big projects that he took on, but that ended up being like a huge upgrade to the boat because you use that little nav table all the time when you have no furniture on a race boat. And then this was an interesting day. So I had a friend from Oregon named Cooper, and Cooper knew I was here in Maine working on my boat. So he reached out to his friend, Marissa, who's here tonight. He reached out to his friend Marissa and was like, "Will you take my boy a care package? He's in the boatyard 20 hours a day right now working on the boat." So Marissa showed up with, I guess that's the care package. And it had like a sandwich and a couple beers and a couple joints, and like brought me this care package, and that was that. Like it was just like, hey, my friend said bring out a care package, whatever, and she showed up and met me and handed off that care package, and that was really cool. And then this is the boat now beginning to come together. You know, we had a gray vinyl wrap installed so we could do some sponsor logos, but I didn't have a title sponsor. That's why I went with the flat gray, so I could put logos over the top of it, because I didn't have a title sponsor yet, and I was trying to like leave this boat like ready, like we're ready to put a sponsor on it. We just need the sponsor. And then I had all the bottom paint, which I did that whole bottom myself. Chris helped sand it down with me, but then I ended up having to paint the whole thing. It took close to a month, and did a really, really nice racing bottom on the boat myself, which was an immense amount of work. And a huge shout out to West Marine. They were one of my big sponsors, and they gave me a budget to procure stuff from their stores. And one of the things that I did was buy all my bottom paint. So that was like $5,000 right there just in bottom paint, and then all the brushes and the rollers and the materials and the suits. And so West Marine really, really helped out when it came to getting the boat ready here in Portland. And then this was, as soon as the boat went back in the water, Chris was back at work, and he had a new project where money was tight, but we really, really, like we had a very dangerous lithium battery set up on the boat that was not proper, and that's like the way that you blow the boat up is with not proper lithium batteries. So we decided to switch out to new lithium batteries and a whole new charging system. And so we had Bruce Schwab, Ocean Planet Energy is his company. So after finishing the Vendée Globe and being the first American to ever finish the Vendée Globe, Bruce came back here and followed his passion of renewable energy systems. It's solar, high output alternators, lithium batteries, all the electronics to control them. So Bruce really hooked us up, and we got everything from Bruce, and we did a huge charging system overhaul. And basically Chris approached me very serious, and he's like, I want this. I want to do this. You have so much going on. You do everything else. I got this. And it was such a big leap of faith. And I was like, all right, dude, it's fully in your hands. So Chris, and then one of Bruce's old installers named Devin was a big help. And then Bruce was a huge help just in technical support. But we did a charging system that at the time, I was so pissed off that we put all of our resources of time and manpower, we put so much into that charging system, but in the end, it works phenomenally well. At the time, I was really stressed out because we were putting so much into that charging system, but it works phenomenally well. So huge shout out to Bruce, because that was a game changer. That was a game changer. And huge shout out to Chris, because Chris went to work every day for he ramped it up to 12-hour days, and he went to work every day for, I think, 16 days for 12 hours a day to get that thing installed. It was crazy complex, but it worked awesome. And big shout out to Devin. Devin's the man. Devin's great. And that was the boat going back in the water, and you can tell, the deck paint is still old, but she's an entirely different boat cosmetically than what came out of the water just 6 weeks prior. And I would be remiss if I did not thank Maine Yacht Center, but Maine Yacht Center treated me very, 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 very well. So they knew I didn't have any money. I was that broke guy with a dream trying to race around the world. Maine Yacht Center is like a halfway house for broke yachtsmen trying to race around the world. So did Brian Harris make it tonight? Is he here? Oh, so yeah, I thought Brian was going to be here, but I got my yard bill and I was expecting like 50 grand, and it was like way less. Yeah, they really helped me out. So massive shout out to Maine Yacht Center. And we do have Nathaniel here from Maine Yacht Center. He helped work on the boat last year. He serviced a few things. So, and that was the whole thing with the campaign, was just like the money that we did have, the money that we did raise. Like I literally rolled into Maine Yacht Center. As I was approaching Maine, I didn't even know how I was gonna pay for the haul out. And then at that time, Annapolis Yacht Club's like, here's 7 grand. And someone came back in with like 5 grand. And I'm like, all right, I got 12 grand. I need like 50. And it was just every day. I was like, I don't even know how I'm gonna pay this, but I've got to order the rigging and haul the boat out and this and that just to keep it on track. And it all somehow just kept on working out. It was inspiring, really, just how many people wanted to help out. It's just truly inspiring. And then this is a few weeks later. So when Marissa met me and dropped off lunch, she said, if you ever need a place to crash, let me know. So 3 weeks later, I was like, hey, can I crash at your house for about 3 or 4 days? And then I crashed at her house for like 3 or 4 days, and now we're together. And so we really, really hit it off quite famously and had a really, really cool connection. And it happened very rapidly, but she really welcomed me into her life, and I'm super grateful for that. And so we had this amazing period where basically I was at Marissa's house, and she had 2 spare guest rooms, and I kept those guest rooms occupied because I had friends flying in to help me out with the boat. So here's the guy closest is my buddy Walt from Berkeley, one of my oldest, best friends that I started a veteran sailing nonprofit with like 15 years ago. And then next to that is Ed, who sailed with me over to Spain. And then there's Delinda and Chris, and there's George and Annie, and Annie's actually here tonight. And then here's Marissa, closest to me. And we had these amazing dinner parties, and we just all got to know each other, and we had all these interesting people kind of come in through our lives, and it was a really special time, especially as Marissa and I were just getting to know each other. And then we got the boat, as the boat went back in the water, we put the mast back in, the boom's back on, the sails are back on, you've got some new decals on the boat, the charging system's in, the new batteries are in, so now the boat is like ready to go sailing, and this was in early August of last year. And so we got the boat out, we went for a couple of sails, and we were prepping to go to Spain. We were trying to leave in a couple days to go to Spain, But unfortunately, on our second test sail, I realized that there was a fairly large crack kind of in one of the stringers, like in the structure of the boat, below the compression post, but next to it. And it ended up being like somewhat kind of sort of slightly superficial. And so the guys at Maine Yacht Center, they ground it out, and then the area with the crack was like right around here. So they ground that out, and they built a whole new compression post. And basically Brian Harris and those guys, he was like, Ronnie needs to get to Spain, so all hands on deck, just whatever's in line, move it aside, but we got to get Ronnie's boat working again. So again, Maine Yacht Center, just like, they really came through huge. And I mean, like, even that stuff, like, I definitely had to pay for that because it included a lot of labor. You know, they could give me days in the boatyard for free. They could just look the other way. But when it comes to that stuff, I had to pay for all the hours of labor, which was expensive. But the fact that they got it done in 8 days was insane. It was a full court press, and I can't thank them enough, because there's all these little things that if I would have gotten more tripped up, it would have possibly ruined the whole campaign. It was always just that close to failure. And so that's, on the photo on the right is some vacuum bagging of some fiberglass, and that was Seth and Will. Seth and Will really did most of the heavy lifting on that project. And that's the old compression post. They had a new compression post built at a machine shop, and it was way stronger and heavier than the old one. It was it was really, really good work by them. And then I also, I don't think Barb's here, but through my Annapolis Yacht Club Foundation supporters, I met a local doctor here named Barbara, and she really, really helped me out a lot. And this was her going through my medical kit with me, and she became a big supporter of the campaign and a contributor, but also she helped prescribe me all of the antibiotics and EpiPen and everything that I would need. She really helped me get the last of my medical training, all my medical stuff done. And so every time you're working on the boat, there's also like, oh yeah, the boat work, but you've also got to have those 3 certifications, and you've got to have all that in your med kit, and you got to do all that logistically. And there was always so many moving pieces. But again, I just kept finding so much support here in Portland, Maine, which was really inspiring. And it was this great place that I came to just for this race. And it ended up being like, that in Portland, Maine, I found all this support. And then that theme just continued because my new partner, Marissa, and her brother made this connection to Fred Forsley. And I met Fred, and Fred was like fully on board with what I was doing, and comes from a family that has a long and proud history of supporting veterans and veterans causes. And he had supported Bruce Schwab, and I mean, the company Shipyard and a lot of their marketing is built on the maritime tradition of Maine. And there were so many cool tie-ins where there were so many cool tie-ins, and it was such a reasonable amount of money that I needed to get to the start line that Shipyard Brewing came on board as the title sponsor. And that was in August, right before I left for Spain. And for me, it was like a dream come true, because like I said, I wouldn't, every day I was just trying to figure out how to get to the next day and to have enough money. And like I said, it all just somehow kept working out. And then as I was getting ready to leave here, I still had like 50 grand I had to go spend in Spain to be on the start line. And I had no idea where that money was going to come from. And then very, very fortunately, I found a title sponsor. So thank you to Shipyard, thank you to Fred. And so the whole thing with Shipyard came through, I mean, literally like 3 days before I left. I think it was like August 26th or 28th or something. So Shipyard came on board, and they came on board as my title sponsor, and then we were leaving September 1st with the boat all put back together. We didn't even have time to go for a test sail. Like, we got the boat back together, the new compression post was in, and then we left. Like, we didn't have time to even go for a test sail. We had to leave. We had to get started heading to Spain. And so that's Ed and I leaving on, I believe, September 1st, and then Shipyard and Fred and all them, they followed us out with a powerboat, and we got some photos from the powerboat. And that's just us leaving Portland and setting sail. And we gradually added more sail and had quite a nice first evening out of Portland. And then it was pretty light, and we were testing out the new spinnakers. So now we have the new spinnakers. That was the new masthead kite. We also tested out the new fractional kite. And we spent 2 days sailing to Chester, Nova Scotia, which was a super, super cool place. And there was a hurricane that was spinning, I don't know, like 60 or 80 or 100 miles offshore of Nova Scotia, but there was a hurricane that was directly in our path. And it was just predicted just to spin. So we went into Chester, Nova Scotia, and we tied up for like 3 days just to wait it out. And the weather was phenomenal in Chester. And through an Italian round the world sailor that's based here in Portland, we got connected with the owner of the marina there, called South Shore Marine. And he was a super friendly guy named Sean Mulrooney. And so when we pulled up, this was total Canadian hospitality. He's like, when you pull in, your mooring ball is number 35. There's a skiff on the mooring ball, and there's a truck in the parking lot with the keys in the ignition. And this is like, I've actually read these stories. I've read these stories over the years about like Canada. And now I have my own Canada story. So we pull up to a mooring ball. It was Labor Day weekend. He's like, don't call the authorities. Just. So we pull up to the mooring ball. We tie up. We get the skiff. We go ashore. We grab this GMC truck with the keys in the ignition. We go straight to the pub, have a lobster roll. It was the best thing in the world. So when we were leaving, a few days later, I think it was like $50 a day. We were there for 3 days. So I asked Sean how he wanted to get paid, cash or Venmo or whatever. And so he's like, don't complicate it with money. And then we had mentioned that we were sponsored by Shipyard, and Sean was like, I love Shipyard, but you can't find it here. So I was like, can I pay my marina bill in Shipyard? And so Sean was stoked, and he actually messaged 2 days ago. He'll be here in 2 days. He's like, I bumped the mystery talk by 2 days. But Sean was like salt of the earth, just Nova Scotia, Canada guy. And so I paid my marina bill in Shipyard, and then that's a photo of us. We came into the dock just to make 2 adjustments, and then we left. And so once we left Nova Scotia, we had some really nice sailing leaving Nova Scotia, and then we had an electrical problem, an autopilot problem. It took me a bit, but I figured that out. We almost turned back. I figured that out though, and at least I knew what it was. So we were on our backup autopilot across the Atlantic. We saw some really heavy weather off of Newfoundland, like east of Newfoundland, south of Greenland. We saw some quite heavy weather. The boat was slanting quite a bit. And then we had, again, some more kind of nice sailing. This was right in the middle with a reef in the main and the fractional code 0. And then we had some light air sailing that then turned into some very quick downwind sailing into Spain. And so after 16 days total, it was like 2.5 to Nova Scotia and 14 to Spain. So after 16.5 days total, Ed and I pulled into A Coruña, Spain, which was the starting line of the Global Solo Challenge. And so when we got there, we basically had like 5.5 weeks until the start of the race. So Ed had to leave the following day, which somehow I got yelled at immigration for that. I don't know. So so that's Ed and I taking bottles of champagne after a crossing of the Atlantic. And then right when Ed left, basically I think I had 1 day alone, and then Marissa flew in and so did Chris. So then we had Marissa and Chris there, and Marissa and I were now very much an item. And Chris was there to help me for my last 5 weeks in Spain until the start of the race. And so one of the first big projects that we undertook was we had an issue with our wind instrument mounts and also our masthead radio antenna, and then also one halyard. So we had a couple of issues that it was way easier to pull the mast out to fix those. And once we fixed them properly, they should be good for around the world. So we pulled the mast out day 1 in Spain, or day 2 or whatever. We pulled the mast out, and then you see a bunch of new solar panels now going on the deck. So again, Bruce Schwab got us hooked up with Soldian, which is an Italian solar panel company, and we started getting all the fancy solar panels that you put on the around the world boats. So we did a major solar project where we took off the old solar panels, added we took off the old solar panels and we doubled the capacity. So we took off 600 watts of solar and we put on 1,290 watts. Amongst other projects. We had a lot of projects in Spain that we were working on until the final night of our time in Spain. But in the evenings, nonetheless, we did get together with some of the other skippers. And so that's Chris and Marissa and myself, and then also Filippo and Ricardo. Ricardo finished the race nonstop. He got fourth in the race. Really nice Italian guy. Hope to see him in Maine. But that was us on a Saturday night in Spain outside of our favorite ham and cheese bar, a Habanera. And that's what you do in Spain. You go get ham and cheese, and it's the coolest thing ever. So through Ricardo, I had met another Italian guy named Joelli, who actually came to visit Ricardo, and then he could see that I needed a lot of help, and he asked if I needed help, and I said, yeah. So Joelli came on with the team, and he stayed in our Airbnb that we had, and I covered his expenses and stuff, but Joelli volunteered a month of his time to work on the boat, and he worked on the boat every single day for a month with me. And then, unfortunately, at that time, Chris had to go home. Chris was battling cancer, and he had some complications with that, and he had to come back to New England for some treatment and stuff, which was very unfortunate. Joelle and I took him to the airport, and then it was Joelle and I. And so you can see in all these photos, the boat's taking shape more and more. So there's more solar panels on the boat in this photo, and Joelle is lashing down a gray man overboard module, which you have to have in case you have to go rescue another skipper in the race. Some people ask why you need that stuff for a solo race, but it's for the other sailors, not yourself. And then, so just day by day, we're just working on the boat every single day. And Shipyard had sponsored me right before I left Maine. So we had no time to do anything until I got to Spain. So then once we got to Spain, we were having these marketing calls with Robert and Sean and Emily and Marissa and Fred and the whole marketing team. And so we had to brand the boat and brand the sails. So we had these huge decals. Just to put it in perspective, those decals were, the Shipyard logo was 15 feet long. So, and you'll see on the boat, it doesn't even look that because it's a huge boat, but the red Shipyard was 15 feet long. So, and the whole thing was 12 feet tall. So we got custom logos for the sails done. We got custom logos for the boat. We had to put all those on, and it was a race against the clock. Every single day, we would wake up with whatever volunteer army I had. We're like, all right, we have 21 days left. We got to do this and this and this, weather permitting. So here's our day. And so we ended up with this volunteer army every day, just trying to make it happen. And I'm immensely grateful to everyone that pitched in. And so now the boat's looking more and more like a boat. Now we have all the new solar on. The mast is back in, the boom's on, some of the safety gear's on, and then we had myself and Joelle in the middle, and then we had Daciel, who I actually met in Portland, Maine the year prior, and he was actually the first person that ever came down to help me out with the boat, was Daciel, and that was for 2 hours at Maine Yacht Center. The first person that ever came to help me with the boat stayed in touch, and he's like, do you need anyone in Spain? And I'm like, yeah, dude. So I flew him over and covered his expenses, but I couldn't pay these guys. I didn't have the money to pay these guys. And so, but these guys were in the trenches with me up until the start. And then here I am going through all the freeze-dried food. So I had to buy food for, I estimated the race would take 130 days, but I was gonna take at least 150 days worth of food. And my mentality was that if I was more than 20 days behind schedule, I probably wasn't doing that well anyways, so I would just pull in and get more food. But I was at least gonna take food for 150 days. So I bought all my freeze-dried food from France, which was a bit of a leap of faith because unlike all this stuff that I had been buying in the US at REI and trying, now I was buying food from brands I didn't know. So I discovered on the race that some of them were good and some of them were horrible. So I had a couple meals in there that like, just, you didn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. But that was going for all the freeze dried. I had food for like 148 days when I left. And here's a drone shot of the boat at the dock, finally starting to really look like she's going to look in the race. So now we've got the bigger green area on the bow that's now compliant with the rules. We've got the green 50 on the bow that is again compliant with the rules. We've got all the solars on board now. Both life rafts are on board now, which is all stuff with the rules. So every day that we were working on the boat, it was to be in compliance with all the rules. And all the rules were good rules. Marco did a phenomenal, the race promoter, Marco, did a great job. But we were working, as were a lot of teams, up until the very last final day to like tick all the boxes. Like I did not have Marco's blessing to start until the day before. And that was the case with a lot of my competitors as well. And then now I had another buddy on the team as well. That's Jose. He flew out for the last 12 days. Jose is one of my oldest buddies. I did Fiji, or I did COVID with him in Fiji. We were on sailboats, shut off from the world with the best waves in the world. It was amazing. But Jose came out, and here's the Shipyard Brewing logos going on the mainsail. So just to keep this in perspective, in this photo, the mainsail is off the boat, and it's in an upper loft at the boatyard. Just to get that sail braked back up, get it down, get it onto the boat, move the boat across the harbor, then move the boat back across the harbor, put it back on, raise it, all this. So like you see a sail in a loft being worked on, you don't realize how much work has to be done to actually get that sail back on the boat ready to go. It's a phenomenal amount of work, and with limited manpower, we were working every day, 12 to 14 hours a day until the start. And so really grateful to everyone that helped out. And then this is the boat back at the dock in Coruña with no logos on the hull, but the sails are back on, all the solars on, and, oh no, actually that photo's out of order. That's right when we arrived. I'm sorry, that photo's out of order. But here it is with the mast back on and all the decals are on now, but the sails are not on yet. So that last photo is out of order, I apologize. But now you've got the 50, which is required by, that was my sail number, 50. So the 50 is on the bow, which is a rule requirement. You've got the Global Solar Challenge logo, which is another rule requirement. And then you have the Shipyard Brewing logo now. And you can see all of the new solars on the boat. And then while I was going over the safety list every day and getting the boat in compliance, I had 3 guys going over to the boatyard and doing work on the sails because we had to get the logos on to meet our requirement with the people that paid for this, Shipyard. And then we had to get the orange, we had to paint the head of the main orange to make it compliant with the rules. And we had to put other logos on the head sails and some other logos on code zeros for sponsors. And so this was the crew on the last week. Marissa came back out for 2 more days. So you had Jose, and then Jason, Daciel, Joelle, Marissa, and myself. And that was back at him and Area Leonesa. So basically, like, whatever I got to pick where we ate at the Ham Bar because him and Area Leonesa was the spot. Ham and cheese. So if you've never been to Spain, a really, really cool place. And A Coruña was a very special place. It's on the northwest corner of Spain, and really, really cool spot. And so this is the boat starting to look like what she's going to look like in the race. So this is the first time we had a photo of the boat with the Shipyard Brewing on the hull and the 50 on the bow, and the sails are going back on, the Shipyard logos on the mainsail, and we're about a week from the start, or 4 or 5 days from the start, and she's really starting to look like she will in the race. And then everyone started showing up, and it was kind of a joke, but kind of not. I was like, well, everyone's showing up. That either means that like I'm about to die or I'm doing something really big. So I'm still here, so I guess I was just doing something kind of cool. But we had everyone from, thank you. So we had Sean and we had Emily from Shipyard. We also had James from Shipyard UK. Fred couldn't quite make it out for the start. And I had a couple friends from Los Angeles, and And then my buddy Sean Doyle in the top left from day one of the whole thing. He came all the way out from Hawaii with his girlfriend. And then you had Jose, and then you had Whitehall standing next to me. He's the old owner of the boat. Joelle's bottom right. Dalciel's next to me. So that'll come back in again in the presentation. This is a really cool photo that Emily took, but this is the morning of the start. I got down to the boat when it was still full dark to start getting ready. And I mean, I didn't get to sleep much the last night, or most nights, but and then everyone else was showing up, and basically the race officially started for us on Saturday the 28th. But all 8 of the boats that were on my start day, we all elected to wait until the following day to start because the weather at the time of our start was like horrendous. So we were waiting for the conditions to subside a little bit. So we officially started on Saturday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but all of us actually started Sunday morning. So this was first light Sunday morning when Emily and the crew was coming down. And this was kind of the crew on the dock. We had like 7 or 8 people, or excuse me, 15 people on the dock. And then we got going, and that was me walking down to the boat myself to hop on. And then a couple of the guys came and untied my dock lines and shoved me off. But then I was alone, and that was leaving the dock here with the race promoters following me in a rib. But I just left the dock, and there was a big break wall right there with a lot of people on it, and I just motored out into the bay and started putting my sails up. And the forecast was still to be very, very windy as we left to go offshore. So I was going offshore upwind and a lot of breeze. So as did most of my competitors, I started under 3 reefs and a staysail. So it was very, very underpowered as I left A Coruña, but as soon as I turned the corner 3 miles later, I was on the breeze and I had plenty of sail up. And then I put up the second reef, not the third reef. So I was in 2 reefs and a staysail most of that first day, and like 30-ish knots of breeze, but there was some gusts to 40. And then we got around Cape Finisterre, and I was doing very well. I was faster than the boats I was with because I was a 50-footer. So upwind, I did have an advantage over most of the boats I was racing against on my start day. Upwind anyways. And so then we got around the corner. And when I say corner, I mean Cape Finisterre. And so then I started going down the coast of Portugal, essentially. And the wind was shifting, so we weren't quite so much upwind, but now we were more reaching with the wind on our side and starting to go quite fast. And then unfortunately, my primary autopilot, the one that we had a little issue with leaving Canada, which was a wiring issue I had figured out, but my primary autopilot failed on night number 1. So I was racing around the world for 130 days, and I lost my number 1 autopilot on the first night. And so that was like, I'm about to cry right now. That just was so upsetting. To lose your first primary autopilot on the first night was just so upsetting. But then I got it on the backup autopilot, and our speed was fine, the boat was fine, but I knew that I only had that backup autopilot. And then I had another autopilot that was like the backup that just gets you into port, but you're no longer racing if you're on that pilot. So that was a really huge blow to lose my number 1 pilot on the first night. That was really hard to deal with. And then also I had so many problems the first couple days. I also had a through-hull fitting come off. I had a hose clamp come off in the back of the boat, but I filled the back of the boat with water, and the boat was basically like sinking. And so I lost a lot of repair materials and boat building materials and epoxy. And then I had a whole container of West Systems epoxy come open because it was sloshing around in water. So now I had like 500 gallons of water infused with epoxy all in the back of the boat. Made the most disgusting, gnarly mess I've ever seen in my entire life, and I was dealing with it for months, and it was just horrible. And I lost a lot of repair stuff, and then I had to go up the rig twice in the first like 4 days. I had so many problems the first few days. I was texting Marissa, and I was like, there's no way I'm gonna make it around the world. Like, there's no way. I'm sure Bruce knows the feeling. I don't know why I feel like I'm gonna cry right now, but then, we overcame most of those problems. The boat was going on the backup autopilot. I got the back of the boat cleaned out. I had lost a lot of repair materials, and that sucked. I had lost one autopilot computer. That sucked. But we were gaining on everyone because we were in the more upwind section of the race where the 50-foot boat had a waterline advantage over my 40-foot competitors. So we were actually surging to the front of the pack, and we were reaching down the coast of Portugal, had some fantastic sailing. This is when the race got really fun, was once I worked out the kinks, we started going downwind. It was really fun, and it was just getting warmer. And then, the first couple of days I had to run the batteries to charge because we were still in European winter, and there weren't that long of days. But as we got further south, the sun was up more hours, and it got more intense, and my solar started taking care of everything. And I was a full solar-powered boat almost the whole race, which was crazy. Props to Bruce Schwab. It's all Bruce Schwab. And then this is one of my favorite photos of the race, but I took this with the drone. Like I said, I'm a big drone guy. I was the only guy flying drones on the boat, but I got this approaching the Canary Islands, and we were like smashing with a reef in the main and the code zero. We were smashing. We were like doing close to 20 knots in that photo. And then you can see I went right between a couple islands in the Canaries. That's just a cell phone screenshot, but you can see I'm doing like 16.6 knots in the photo. And then as I got up to the Canaries, we had to deal with a lot of traffic. So I also had multiple boats that were on radar but not on AIS. So I could not sleep at all that night. I had to go over 24 hours straight just to get through the Canaries in a good position and without any incidents. And then we entered, for me, again, one of the highlights of the race was being off the coast of Africa. I just had a really fun time off the coast of Africa because Cole Brower was right next to me. We were neck and neck, and we had Ricardo right behind us. So I was like, this is a race. Like, me and Cole are neck and neck, Ricardo's right behind. And it wasn't blowing 30 or 40 like it was in the south. It was blowing 10. So you could put up everything and just push the boat. And so I was like full main, masthead, code zero here, and we were in an offshore breeze in the morning. And I worked all night long when this photo was taken. I was up all night long, changing sails 3 times and jibing, and then 0 sleep. And I was like, I gotta get the drone up. And that was just a really special morning. And then this was coming down the Atlantic, and I've got the A2 up, so I've got the masthead kite up, and we were downwind towards the Cape Verdes, and we were just seeing a lot of really big speeds. I saw like 23 knots of boat speed was the maximum, but we were doing a lot of like 15, 16, 17 knots the whole time, putting up some good daily runs, close to 300 miles. And then that's just a view from inside the boat. If you notice the exterior views of the boat, there's a lot of like windows. So from inside the boat, you can check your sail trim, which is really valuable. You could be in your bunk and look at your sail trim, which was pretty cool. But then, all good things come to an end. And we left the Northeast trades and got close to the doldrums. And if you know the reputation of the doldrums, it's really, really challenging sailing. There's like a lot of wind or there's no wind. Typically it's very light, but it's very, very hot. There's a lot of squall activity. And so the radar, sometimes I show some radar shots because the radar is like, when you race around the world solo, you realize how awesome the radar is. And the radar would tell me when the squalls were coming, and I would a lot of times have the full main, the code zero up, and I would see the big squall, and I would time it just perfect. I would go outside and furl the zero, go through the squall with just the main up, and then just unfurl the zero. And the radar was awesome, but those big green blobs are to be avoided. If you can avoid them, it's better. If you get hit by them, the wind increases suddenly and then goes to nothing, and you just get poured on. So there was a lot of tactically avoiding the green blobs, but which you can't see those green blobs from weather forecasting. You have to be in real time with the radar. And then here's Shipyard Brewing here. This is at the equator basically, and then this is inside the boat, just a little shot with Chris's nav table there, and just looking outside. And There's Pumpkinhead Pete going across the equator. You can see north 000. We're just doing a steady 10 knots headed south. And then that's with a reef in the main and the masthead code 0 up. And we're going, just 10 or 11 knots south, not pushing the boat super hard, just trying to make it around the world without stopping and trying to make good miles while we're doing it. So at this point, the race was still very close. I was like a day behind Cole on the Class 40 at the equator. So she had gotten a bit ahead of me there. And then this was pretty far from the equator. This was I think 29 south. But this was what I consider entering the south. Was basically I went from northeast trades and being warm and sunny mostly to very, very rapidly it got colder and grayer and less consistent, not northeast trades anymore. So that squall line represents the line of demarcation for leaving the trades and entering the south. And so after that first system, it did get quite light, and we were just sailing along under code zeros and spinnakers for a couple more days. And that was around, I think, November 20th, so just under a month into the race. And then, in keeping with my ham and aerial laser theme, this was Thanksgiving dinner. I got ham and cheese from the ham and cheese bar. So I got 5 meals before I left Spain. I got special meals, and I got ham and cheese for Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, birthday, and Cape Horn. So that was my first one I dug into. That was Thanksgiving with a pocket knife and a shipyard hat and ham and cheese on Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving was almost a month into the race, so I was approaching the Cape of Good Hope. So I was really entering the south. I was almost to the Indian Ocean, and then this was exactly 1 month. So that's my 1 month beard check. So I was clean shaven at the start. That was my 1 month beard, where the beard's getting really white at the bottom. So we're shaved tonight, but she's getting white. And so here's Pumpkinhead Pete again, entering the south. The weather just changed so much every day. It was just always this never-ending, amazing journey. The weather just changed every day, but this is a photo you're in the south now. So now this is 40 degrees south, and you can see we're under small sails. The main sail's reefed. We don't have a spinnaker up. We've got a reefed main and a stay solar or a jib, but you can see our wake. We're absolutely smashing. So this is going downwind in 40 knots of wind. And this was entering the south. As I passed the Cape of Good Hope, the night before I passed the Cape of Good Hope, I saw 50 knots of breeze. That was my first night seeing 50 knots in the race, and we were just smashing. So it was welcome to the south, the place I've been fearing / anticipating for so many years. And then this next shot is a shot that really, to me, just screams the south, because you see that gray sea. You see the overcast skies, you see the crepuscular rays of the sun showing through, but you always see birds. And if you ever listen to other sailors talk about being in the south, you always hear about the birds. And for me, Bruce is shaking his head. For me, it was one of the coolest things that I take away. It's just, there was always this amazing bird life out there, which again, just tells you that everywhere in the world, there is a thriving ecosystem that we have to try to protect. That's one thing that really stuck in my head was you can be the furthest you are from any land, and there's life everywhere. You don't see pods of dolphins out there, but you see a lot of birds out there, and they're all feeding on fish. And it's just really incredible wilderness, and just the remoteness of the Southern Ocean was phenomenal. And then after your big depressions, you usually have some kind of light spot. And so you see we've got a spot back up, and we're working through a light spot. And then this is one of my favorite photos from the race. So it was a pretty light morning, and I was I want to get the drone back up. I want to get a cool drone shot. And sure enough, like I said about the birds, you put the drone up, all of a sudden there's birds all by your drone, and I'm incredibly stressed out, please don't hit my drone, please don't hit my drone. And then sure enough, this one bird flew in front of the drone and then pumped the brakes. And so that's a screen grab from that. So a really cool video clip, because you can see him come towards my drone and then go and leave. So I really love that photo quite a lot. And then this really entered a sad period of the race for me. I started having a lot of problems with my sails. So when I got my sails for the race, I had a sales sponsor from Denmark, really great company, Alstrom Sales, and I'm super grateful for their support. We really needed to do some more work on the sails to prevent chafe. So the sails were recycled plastic, and they were supposed to be like taffeta on both sides and everything, and they were supposed to be pretty much bulletproof. But unfortunately, just the amount of wear and tear of the mainsail being eased along the spreaders of the masts, it was really humbling how much of a toll that took on the mainsail. And that was something that I have to own it and learn from that mistake, that I'll never enter a round the world race underprepared again from like a sail chafe perspective. That was a really unfortunate time. So I had to drop the mainsail 4 times in the period of a week and do running sail repairs. So the mainsail was down on deck a lot in the Indian Ocean, and I was really slowed down. I lost a few hundred miles to my main rival, Colbert, which I ended up making out, but it was really, really upsetting. I saw the race slipping away from me at that point, that I was having those sail issues less than halfway in. And this was kind of a cool, just like Google Earth shot. I had Starlink on the race, so I had full internet out there. And I always loved just like sometimes just looking at Google Maps. It's like you would zoom out and you're like, we are in the middle of nowhere. And so I've crossed a lot of oceans before. I've been back and forth to Hawaii 19 times, and like I'm not scared of being in blue water, but I have to admit, especially having sail problems, I felt incredibly small and vulnerable when I was in between South Africa and Australia. Going across the Indian Ocean was psychologically really, really hard for me, because I think of the problems I was having with the boat. And then just another cool shot of the crepuscular rays. They don't quite show up as good on this screen as they do on my laptop. But by then, after the autopilot problems and the sail problems, I had made the decision that I was going to do a pit stop in Hobart, Tasmania. So the race was a non-stop race, but it allowed pit stops. And the pit stop had to be at least 4 days. So you were not allowed to go into a port and just stop for 6 hours and get more food. If you stopped in somewhere and if you tied to a dock and took any help at all, you had to stop for 4 days. And that's a fair rule. But I made a decision to go into Tasmania. I was having sail issues. I had lost a lot of my boat building and repair materials, and I was missing my primary autopilot computer. And I felt it was going to be poor seamanship to go towards Cape Horn without addressing a lot of issues. So I made the decision to pull into to Hobart, and that was a very difficult decision because I was basically giving up on trying to battle with coal. I had to stop, and so this was a cool photo though, that was really special to me because you can see land in the background and you can see a dolphin jumping. And when you're out in the middle of nowhere, you don't really get the dolphins, but near land you do. And then so I pulled into Hobart and had to clear the customs, and I did a lot of back and forth with the guys at Customs and Border Patrol. They were extremely professional, very, very helpful, very, very reactive and proactive, and really, really top-notch guys. And they came and met me on New Year's Eve. So I got in there on New Year's Eve, which if you know anything about sailing, that's when Sydney Hobart finishes. So I got like an epic date night with my girlfriend in Hobart on New Year's, completely unplanned, when all the race boats were in Tasmania. So it was like the coolest thing ever. And we were on a couple of race boats. I have a lot of friends down in Australia, so we ended up on a bunch of really cool race boats, and we had a really nice time. But there's no time for days off when you're racing around the world. So January 1st, early in the morning, we were down in the boat with a crew of volunteers, and we got the mainsail and the head sail off. We started getting sails off, and we had the mainsail in the loft New Year's Day morning, and James came to work on it right there in Tasmania. James was a really, really good guy. So we were getting sail repair done right over New Year's. And then January 4th, I left as early as the rules would allow me to leave. So we got everything done by the night of the 3rd and the morning of the 4th. And then at 11 a.m., the earliest I could leave the dock was by noon, per the rules with the organizer and the agreement that we had made. So at 11 a.m., I moved the boat to the fuel dock. I filled back up with diesel, and then I cleared out with customs, and those were a lot of my friends that helped me out during my time in Tasmania. And some of those friends I've known for over 10 years, and some of them were newer friends. But the really cool part was that when I filled back up with diesel, we took 5 gallons of diesel, and that includes motoring into Tasmania, where I burned at least 2. But by my estimations, I burned less than 3 gallons of diesel fuel to go halfway around the world because of my solar and my efficient charging system that Ocean Planet and Bruce helped hook up. So that was 67 days and over 13,000 miles on 3 gallons of diesel. So I was kind of proud of that. And then a week after leaving Hobart, Tasmania, on January 11th, the #1 guy that helped me work on the boat, Chris, lost his battle with cancer. So on January 11th, Chris passed away. And the crazy thing was I just found out tonight, but when I called Chris, I spoke to him just a few days before he passed on WhatsApp, and he was like sharp as a tack. And apparently that was his last day of real full consciousness. He had kind of been down, and then he was like super alert. And I had the good fortune to call him on that day. And I didn't know that we were saying goodbye, but at that point I kind of knew it wasn't far off. And I had a beautiful conversation with Chris, and he was just so stoked on the fact I was down south doing it. The whole goal was that he wanted to help me go do it. And here I was doing it, and he was on his deathbed. And unfortunately, he passed on, I believe, January 11th. But that was a screenshot from where I did a toast to Chris. And on that day when Chris passed, it was like blowing 45. We had small sails up, we were hauling ass, and like, I knew he was looking down and smiling, that like we were down south, like we were actually doing it. And I knew it meant a lot to Chris. He almost gave his life to help me get there. I mean, he knew that he was close to the end, so it's, yeah. And then this is just like just the scenery from the south. You're always kind of looking out the companionway, and there's always just huge waves and long wakes and long rooster tails, and you're flying, you're going downwind in 40, 45, 50 knots, and just long, wild surfing runs towards Cape Horn, getting across the Pacific. I had a really dicey situation south of New Zealand. I had to dodge a couple of really small islands that were just right in my way, and it was blowing 50. And I mean, it's not like I almost hit land or anything, but it was a very tense time of just navigating through islands everywhere south of New Zealand. And the weather dictated that I go a certain route, and that had peril in my route, so I had to avoid them. A lot of nights on the phone with my weather router. The race did allow weather routers, and I was in consultation with Seattle, Washington quite a bit over the weather. Then the weather is just phenomenal. If you race around the world solo, you just have such a respect for the weather, and it's just so interesting. And this was, again, right near Point Nemo, and this was, again, like another Google Maps screenshot. You can see we're getting close to Point Nemo, and you would zoom all the way out on your phone, and you couldn't even see South America and Australia. All you could see was the big white thing on the bottom, Antarctica. And so you're like, wow, A, I'm really far from land, but B, we're near Antarctica. There's just nothing down there. Like, you are in the South, so much life down there, but it's a wild, wild place. And I don't know why I'm so fascinated with going back now. I don't know what's wrong with me. And then we had some really challenging weather, like 10 days before Cape Horn and 7 days before Cape Horn. Really challenging weather where I got a big southerly swell and breeze. And you'll see, if you go back and look at my track, you'll see I kind of take a jog north twice, and that's because I had to get pushed north from the big southerly. But then we got some really, really nice sailing for a couple of days where it was really, really pleasant sailing with code zeros and spinnakers up in 15 or 18 knots and relatively flat seas. But then as we were coming to Cape Horn, we started getting into some really, really big conditions. And came into Cape Horn, there was a low pressure that I was going to try to initially go ahead of, but then the forecast changed and the storm was speeding up. It wasn't really worth trying to stall out because there was another one right behind it that was just as big. So I kind of just had to like pull the trigger and go. So I began going for Cape Horn. I never really slowed down again. I got this photo from an internet forum that was following the race, but that little boat icon is me. And I came past Cape Horn on quite a solid depression. It wasn't that big, like geographically speaking, but it had a lot of punch. And so I saw 58 knots of breeze going around Cape Horn. So I rounded Cape Horn on February 2nd, but in the morning, I believe. But on February 1st, approaching Cape Horn, like I said, I saw 58 knots of breeze, and the seas got scary so fast. I mean, it was just awe-inspiring. Just huge breaking waves. Photos don't do it justice, but just huge breaking waves with long white streaks, and just the water gets vaporized off the top of the waves. It was Bruce. It was absolute madness. It was absolute madness. I ended up dropping the mainsail entirely, which was my plan. And I went downwind under just a storm jib, and I hit 21.7 knots under a storm jib and no mainsail. And that was just, the boat was plodding along doing 10 or 12, and I said, this is okay, we're not breaking anything, this is fine. And we would still launch on huge waves, and we hit, like I said, 21.7 under just a storm jib. And that was in close to 60 knots of wind. But then, so officially at 0325 UTC, the night, I always loved that movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, and so now Groundhog Day, February 2nd, is like a whole new importance. So now I want to have a party like every February 2nd, like that's my Cape Horn day. So that was the Cape Horn photo that you have to get, and then right after Cape Horn, turned north, and I chose to go through the Lemaire Strait, which I chose the Lemaire Strait because I had to go close to the coast for weather, which I'll get into in just a moment. But that's I think it's like 12 or 13 miles wide. It's in between the tip of South America and an island called Staten Island. So it's really tidal through there. But I had like 4 knots of current with me, so it worked out perfect. And I went right through the strait, and we were going really fast over ground because we had so much current with us. But also, you do not want to go there on the wrong current, or if the wind is against the current, you do not want to be in there. So it's quite tricky to time the Lemaire Strait, but a really interesting part of the world. And then you can see my course. I had to go a very different route than any of my competitors, where the typical racing line would take you around Cape Horn and then east of the Falkland Islands. But right as I was rounding Cape Horn, there was a big low pressure coming, and that low pressure was going to come over the continent, and it was going to bring 40 plus knots from the north. And I was trying to dodge that and avoid that as much as possible. So I sailed way closer to shore, because the South American continent, like north of this photo, the continent kind of comes out, and then you get some protection from long fetch and big waves, but also by tucking in close to the coast, I was going to see less breeze for a shorter time than if I stayed further off. And so after I saw 40 knots from the north close to land, then I went out and I was going northeast towards the Falklands, and I had another system right on its back, and I got 40 upwind followed by 56 downwind. And so that shows 53.2 on the wind instruments. But this became like the beginning of a theme where, I mean, I hate to feel sorry for myself or say poor me, but I got so hosed on my weather after Cape Horn. I watched my competitor Cole get perfect weather and just cruise up the Atlantic, and it was a mellow day sail. And I just got hammered one after another, after another, after another. And it was just, it was really, really, really something that was unfortunate. And then this was like north of the Falklands. So a few days later, there was all these fishing boats that were on the AIS, and these huge fishing fleets that are like jigging for squid. And you can see this long line of boats going back towards the Falklands for more fuel or supplies. And I was just coming up on this huge group of fishing boats on a racing yacht and trying to like thread the needle between them. and it organically kind of worked out, but it was a really, really tense couple days. And then right after that, I hit a massive pile of kelp. And so that's a huge pile of kelp on my keel. And just to put this in perspective, I'm still in the Northern 40s. I'm at latitude 43 or something. But I had to jump in the water. I had no other alternative. The boat was stopped. There was so much kelp, the boat was stopped. So I had to go in the water in a wetsuit in very notoriously sharky waters. And so I spent 2 hours standing on that kelp in a wetsuit, just hacking kelp away with a pocket knife tied to my wrist. And I was cutting kelp away. And this was a real low point. I remember distinctly, I remember being in the water and just thinking this is insurmountable. This is not gonna work. I'm not gonna get all this kelp off. I don't know what I'm gonna do about this. There was really heavy weather coming. It was still windy and big waves when I was in the water. And it was so sketchy. It was really unfortunate. But the cool thing is I managed to get all the kelp off. And it was it felt so insurmountable that I didn't have another option. When boxed into a corner, I had no other option but to get it off. So I got it off. But it was really felt insurmountable. And then this was one of the few really, really nice moments. I was on the home stretch. I was pointed towards Europe. I was making good speed. And I had seen a lot of heavy weather, and I had kind of gotten through all of it. I had kept the boat in one piece. I hadn't broken anything major, and I was headed back towards Europe at good speed. And then I kind of had one more major hurdle coming up meteorologically, and then I was going to be in the trade winds and head back to Europe. And so I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I was now almost 80% of the way around the world. So I had sailed over 21,000 miles at this point. And then on February 10th, this low pressure system was spinning off of the South American continent, and it was moving a lot faster than I was. And so it was going to meet me at some point, and I just had to navigate where it was going to meet me and try to get through without breaking anything. And I was going upwind. You can see those northerlies and those northeasterlies. I was upwind through all that. And then here's a satellite photo image. You can see the nice circular formation of this depression. And so I was sailing upwind, up to 40 knots of breeze, and really crossed up seas and short period seas and everything else. And I was down to 3 reefs and a storm jib, and I was throttled back as much as I could and just always trying not to break the boat. I didn't really go over it at the beginning, but I had the oldest boat in the fleet pretty much. I had a 30-year-old boat with a 25-year-old mast, and that was the boat I had, and I was just doing the best with what I had and trying not to break the boat. And then during the Super Bowl, during the third quarter of the Super Bowl, unfortunately I broke the boat. And so I was down below, and I was very, very, very tense, and I was on my bunk, and I was watching the numbers the whole time and checking my navigation and constantly making sail trim adjustments and course adjustments and everything else. And the boat had kind of jumped off of a few waves, and I was trying my hardest to avoid that, because when the boat jumps off a wave, it's going to come slam back to the water, and there's going to be a really big dynamic load on the mast and on the structure of the boat. And unfortunately, the boat jumped off of a wave, and I remember it vividly. I felt the boat kind of go airborne, and I grabbed both sides of my bunk, and I kind of braced for impacts, and then the boat landed, and I heard a bunch of really bad noises outside. So I popped my head up. All right, the rig's down. So I went down below just to collect my thoughts and to put my safety gear on, and then I went up and I investigated everything, and the boat was rolling horribly, and unfortunately the mast was trying to punch a hole into the starboard side of the boat, and you could hear the mast punching the hull and grinding on the hull. And you could also see the hull deflecting a little bit on the starboard side. And given the sea state and the conditions and everything else, I felt and still do that I had to cut the rig away to preserve the boat and not sink the boat. I thought the rig was going to punch a hole in the boat. I felt it was a very big risk. So I cut the rig away. And the really hard part with that is that when you cut the rig away, you're also cutting away your ability to set a jury rig and get home, or at least to land. So when I cut the rig away, in many ways, I kind of at that point made the decision that the boat was probably going to get ditched. It was after this all happened, once I had cut the rig away, and I started motoring towards the coast, but with a little 20-horse engine. The engine was only good for getting off the dock and for charging batteries. It doesn't really push the boat that well. But I was slowly motoring towards the coast, and a kind of a funny anecdote was I lived in San Francisco for a long time, and so the Niners were winning the Super Bowl. And then I dismasked in the third quarter, and so I didn't check the score for a few hours, but once I cut the rig away, things kind of slowed down. I checked the score. I saw they lost. And there was this moment where I was down below, and I just had an absolute temper tantrum. And I was like, and they lost the game. And they lost the game. On top of my rig coming down. But I was motoring towards the coast, and I was in touch with the Argentinian Coast Guard and the US Coast Guard. And we could not get in touch with any other ships for like 11 hours, which was very, very frustrating. But eventually they got in touch with a ship that turned around in just the nick of time, because they came back and we met up at basically sunset. And if they would have turned around any later, it would have then been dark, and the conditions were going to deteriorate right after dark. But one of the big variables was that the biggest storm of the entire race was arriving tomorrow. That's why I had to ditch the boat. If it was just the mast coming down, I would have been fine. I would have figured out a way to get more fuel from a passing ship. I would have figured out a jury rig. I would have figured out something. But the biggest storm of the whole race was coming up the next day. And with no rig on an old open 50 that had no escape hatch and wasn't built to be inverted and escaped from, and et cetera, I chose to preserve life. And I managed to get rescued by a freight ship, for which I'm immensely grateful. But at the same time, it was very, very, very sad as well to lose the boat. And I still have a lot of mixed emotions about that and a lot of guilt that I'll probably never get over. But I pulled up alongside a freight ship, they dropped down a ladder, I climbed up the ladder, and then I was no longer racing around the world, and I was no longer on Shipyard Brewing, but now I was on a freight ship called the Sakizaya Youth. It was a Taiwanese ship full of Taiwanese and Chinese mariners, really, really nice guys. And I said goodbye to Shipyard Brewing. And then when I left, I was ordered to scuttle the boat, so I opened a couple of through holes in the boat when I got off. And you can see on the starboard side, underneath the shipyard, you can see the white damage on the hull where there's no vinyl wrap, and there's actually like pretty significant damage on the hull there. And the tow rail was all gone, and the deck was all messed up, and it's actually, it's challenging. And then that was like the next day on the freighter, there was absolutely massive seas. The forecasts for my position where I dismasted at, the forecast was for up to 70 knots of wind and up to 11 meters of sea state, which is up to 36 feet of breaking waves. So it was like absolutely a horrendous forecast. And even on the freighter was moving incredibly in these like 89 meter seas. And then they had a wind gauge on there, and it said the max wind speed on the freighter was 69.3. And I remember like, they got me at sunset basically. They rescued me, I had some dinner, took a shower, I went to bed for the night. I came up in the morning to have coffee with the captain, and I looked outside while drinking coffee. I was just like, I'm so glad I'm on this boat. I'm so glad I'm on this boat. And like, after that moment, I couldn't really feel any like guilt or shame or second guess myself, because when you abandon a boat at sea and lose the boat is like so many guilt and shame and second guessing yourself. But the next morning, I was just so happy to be alive and be safe on this freighter, and knowing the situation I was in, I knew I made the right move. And then that's myself and the captain of the freight ship. He was a Chinese guy named Tui, and really, really nice guy. He was my age, and we had some really cool conversations. And I really can't say enough good things about the crew of the Sakizaya Youth. So let's give it up for them. Those guys Those guys literally saved the day. Literally saved the day. So I spent 2 days on the freight ship going towards Argentina, and then they pulled up outside of the port of Necochea, Argentina, and they just stopped in the water, and then a Navy boat from Argentina came out and got me just a couple miles offshore, and they rescued me. That's a beard check at 4 months. So he had the 0 beard, the 1 month beard, the 2 month beard, there's the 4 month beard. So, and then we were in Argentina, and that was me with Marissa. I got a clean shaven face like I do tonight, and we made it, and it was a really emotional and really difficult time, and I'm still getting over it, and figuring out what comes next in life. But that's like the end of this story, and the next chapter still remains to be written. So I'm definitely still trying to race the Vendée Globe. For me, this changes nothing. My goal with this race was to prove I could do the Vendée Globe.
I gotta tell you something. Ronnie, before I did the Vendée Globe, I raced around the world once. You've done your first around the world race. You did it. In my first around the world race, around the world, I had to stop twice. You only stopped once.
Well, I stopped twice technically.
Well, I stopped twice. And I flailed. I broke the boom twice. It takes that. You've done what you need to do, and we are with you. I know what it is. That I had to go through all that. You had to go through all that, and this man can do the Vendée Globe. He needs our support to do it. I came to Portland. I needed a ton of support. This is so nostalgic for me to see with all the volunteers. It's not a solo sport.
No.
There's a designated driver. I was a designated driver. This man is a fully qualified designated driver now to do it with our help. And I'll just let you know, I'll be there to support you every way I can. And I'm really proud. Thank you.
I need $7 million. So that is what I'm doing now. My goals don't change. My whole goal in the Global Solo Challenge was to get this sold up in 50 and to get this opportunity and to prove that I was a viable candidate for the Vendée Globe. And if you don't know the Vendée Globe, it's the big leagues of the race I just did. The race I just did was the amateur version, but the Vendée Globe is the big leagues. And Bruce was the first American of only 2 to ever do the Vendée Globe. And so that's my goal before this race. That was always my goal. That was my motivation for doing this race, and I made it 80% of the way around. I was in 3rd place out of 16 boats. I did everything I could with an old boat and limited resources, and I mean, yeah, I know what I'm capable of, and I think we have a good story to sell to the right partners, to connect with the American public and do the Vendée Globe, and that's what we're working on now. But this is the end of this story, and we're going to move on to like a Q&A. I know we're running a little bit late, so we do have like a little Q&A time though. But again, I'd like everyone to raise their glass, please. But this presentation is in memory of Chris. So if we can all please cheers to Chris. Yeah, if there's any questions, feel free.
Do you know what broke on the rig? You know what the point of failure was?
No, the question was, do I know what broke on the rig? I do not know what broke on the rig. We did have all new rigging put on here in Maine. I have no reason to believe that any of that failed. From where I could see, from where I could tell, I don't believe any of the rigging did break. I believe the actual carbon fiber mast tube itself compressed and just broke the tube. That's my theory. And after talking to a couple of naval architects and very experienced professional sailors, they tend to concur as well once I detailed exactly what happened. So no, I don't 100% know what failed, but I think the tube just compressed and failed. But I'll never really confirm that. So it'll always just be a theory because now it's at the bottom of the ocean. So, yeah.
So, what's the difference between the global solo challenge path and the Bentley global?
So the question was, what's the difference between the Global Solo Challenge? Did you say the route?
Yeah.
The route is essentially the same. So they're both round the world races that start and end in Europe and go around the three Great Capes, leaving Antarctica to starboard. So the route is essentially the same. The difference being the Global Solo Challenge is a much more amateur race, and it allows a lot of different types of boats, which is great for budget conscious, ocean racers. Whereas the Vendée Globe is sort of like Formula One or NASCAR or something like that. You have to have a more modern boat that fits exactly in that box rule. Those boats are millions of dollars, and they cost over $1 million a year to run, and you've got to do it for 4 years to get to the start of the Vendée Globe. So it's a 4-year.
Does that make it a faster race?
Yes. Instead of taking 130 days, like I was planning to take, I'll probably take something like 90 or 95 days. The record is in 74 days, but if I do the Vendée Globe, I'm not going to have a brand new boat. I'm going to have an older boat the first time. Hopefully the second time I can get a brand new boat. But I'll be somewhere more like 90 to 100 days. I think Bruce was like 109 days. Yeah, 109 days. But that was also back in 2004. The boats were a lot slower than they are now. The boats just keep getting faster.
How did they do the start times? How did they handicap them? And did they do a good job?
Yeah, so that's a great question, was how did they do the starts and how did they handicap everything and did they do a good job? So yeah, absolutely, they did a good job. I have to say major props to Marco Nannini, who created and promoted the Global Solo Challenge. It's a very unique race with a very unique format. I think he did a good job, I do. I'm sure we could sit around and identify things that could be improved, as always in life, but Marco did a great job, 100%. And the biggest thing Marco did was Marco made the race fair. And that's all I ever asked for, was a fair chance. And Marco did offer a fair chance to so many of us. And he should be massively commended for that. 16 boats started the race, ranging from an SNS 34 to an Open 50 that was wildly different from mine and much faster than mine, because he was a canting keel carbon fiber boat that was much newer with twin rudders. So the boats were rated on IRC, which IRC means International Rating Certificate. Or International Racing Certificate, excuse me. So IRC is like a globally acknowledged rule that gives every boat a theoretical speed. So based on your IRC handicap, so that very slow SNS 34 got like a 2-month jump on me, but a bulk of the fleet started with me. But then that other Open 50 that was carbon fiber and had a canting keel was a much faster boat. He started 3 weeks behind us. So there was like 1 boat, and then another boat, and then 2 more, and then 1 more, and then 3 more, and then 8 more, and then 1 more. So there were 16 boats in the race, but we all started, at different times based on our theoretical performance of the boat on the IRC handicap. So there's no perfect way to do this, but all things considered, I think it was done the best way possible.
So you sort of breezed over cutting the rig off, which is a big deal, right? In the middle of the night, huge seas, wind is howling, tons of noise. How long did it take? How'd you do it?
Did not take very long. I was very well prepared for that, which is something you have to prepare for if you're going to go offshore. Once you get bigger than like maybe a 35 to 40 foot boat, you really can't suffice with bolt cutters anymore. And you've got to have an 18 volt battery powered grinder. So I had a battery powered grinder from the US that sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Like the trigger didn't work right. It was a Milwaukee, not to rip on Milwaukee, but yeah. And so if I would have relied on that thing, it would have killed me. So we actually got another grinder from the hardware store in Spain right before I left, because I did not trust the Milwaukee one. And sure enough, I pulled out the Milwaukee one and it was like, oh. And I got out my Spanish one, and it just like cut through the rigging, just cut everything away. I went through a couple different cutoff wheels, but Yeah, you got to have a battery powered grinder and a few batteries, and you got to pull it out every month and make sure the batteries are charged. But yeah, also it was extremely dangerous cutting the rig away because the boat with no rig has no stability, and it was rolling horribly. We were still in 30 knots of breeze with 4 meters of sea state or something, and it was really, really, really dangerous to be on deck when the rig came down. Super dangerous. But yeah, just fortunate that everything kind of worked out.
You mentioned Cole Brower a couple times. I'm curious what you think the effect for sudden notoriety had on the race and what that might result.
Yeah, no, I mean Cole did a great job in the race. I think that being the first to do anything is an amazing accomplishment. So as the first American female to race around the world solo, I mean she, yeah, it's a great accomplishment for her, and she, unlike anyone else in the race, she had a real full team behind her. So she had, just to be totally honest, she had more resources behind her than the rest of us all combined. So she had a massive advantage at the start. And that's fine. I mean, she managed to connect herself to a lot of resources, but she achieved something incredible, but also her media team did a phenomenal job of marketing that, and they were able to connect with the American public. And that is by far, from my perspective, the most impressive accomplishment was how well they connected with the American public. And I do feel like a combination of a variety of factors, from that to the growth of the IMOCA class, to the internationalization of the IMOCA class, but also to current events going on in New York, where they're all going to come in here in a few weeks to New York and hang out and then race back to France. I think that you're going to see a changing of the climate in the US that's going to be more plausible to find proper American corporate sponsors. Bruce was so much like me. He never had a real corporate sponsor. And just like Cole, she never had a corporate sponsor. She had 2 billionaires writing her a blank check, which helps massively. But that has always been the hard part, is to like break through that barrier and actually find a large corporate sponsor that sees ocean racing and believes that it has the power in America to deliver a positive return on investment. And that has so far remained a very elusive goal. I think she'll probably be the first. I hope to be the second. Like 11th Hour, you know, the ocean race, that's not a proper corporate sponsor. That's just a philanthropic arm of another billionaire. So there has not still to this date, other than honestly Duracell. Duracell, that was a proper American corporate sponsor, but unfortunately he disappeared on the way to the start line. So that probably didn't really help things out. It's been very difficult, and I think that there's a number of us, including Cole and myself and a few others, that are hoping to kind of break through that barrier and find corporate sponsorship. And I think we're right around the corner. I think she's certainly going to do it, and I hope to be in the same race. So.
Did you have scuba gear to cut away the kelp?
No, and that is something I will probably change in the future. A lot of the Vendée Globe boats do carry small scuba apparatus. I will. If I race around when I race around the world again, I will carry some scuba gear. I had a wetsuit and a mask and a knife. I just had to get in and get after it. Yeah. And I'm missing half a lung from getting blown up in Iraq. So I was just like, oh man, this is not the scenario I want to be in. But it's the scenario I'm in, so let's get after it. No, I did not tie myself off to the boat. I did throw a rope overboard to trail behind the boat, but I felt that tying myself off to the boat as I was going back and forth in front of the keel. So I would be like on one side, and I would cut some away, and then I would hold my breath, and I would swim under the boat, but in front of the keel to the other side, and try not to get hit by the boat. And then I would cut more away. And the kelp was so thick in that photo, which like you can see it was, yeah, we covered a lot of stuff before that.
One more.
There we go. The kelp was so thick in that photo that I could like actually stand on the kelp, and I was pulling and cutting away, and it took 2 hours, which So those are really sharky waters, and I've had some interesting encounters with sharks in my lifetime, and I was just like, please don't get eaten by a shark right now, but I really gotta get this going and get out of here. I lost very little time because I got it done in 2 hours. And so.
So first of all, thanks for what you did for ocean racing and veterans and
Thank you.
how the public appreciates the sport. My question is, Starling, was it a big change for this race? Is it going to change ocean racing in the future? And how did it perform for you at the bottom of the world?
Yeah, 100%. So I did manage to get sponsored by Starlink. Oh, someone just rocked up with a beer. Thank you. If you're wondering, I partially lost my voice on Monday night at the Maine Celtics Finals Game 3 with Sean from Shipyard Marketing. So I was trying to root Maine onto a victory in the finals, and that's why I don't have a voice tonight. But yeah, to answer your question, Starlink I think is a total game changer. Starlink did sponsor me for this endeavor, so I did have a dish and service, and there were a couple of people in the race that were also sponsored by Starlink. My Starlink worked 100% of the time everywhere. I never had it not work. The only caveat being that, like, I would frequently turn Starlink off to save power. Whenever I turned it back on, when I was in between New Zealand and Cape Horn, when I was in the Pacific there, it would take a very long time to acquire a satellite and get back on the network. But once it got back on the network, it worked 100%. It was just a bit slower. But everywhere other than the remote Pacific Ocean, where there's just statistically almost no humans, so Starlink doesn't like focus on that part of the world, they could turn on the tap and make it work really well down there. They just don't spend the resources on that part of the world because there's no humans. But the Starlink works everywhere. It's 100% game changer. I'm seeing it on all the new Class 40s and all the new EMOCA 60s. Everyone is getting rid of those domes that say Thales on them. They were all like $10,000 domes that say Thales, and you pay a bunch of money for the data. That's all gone now. It's going to kill that industry. Elon's going to take that industry over. Starlink works amazing, 100%. And it's going to change the game for better or for worse. Some people are going to come back from sea and they're going to say, you know, my sanctuary of not having business emails is now gone, right? Because no one's ever going to go to sea again and be part of a generation that is disconnected. We are now fully connected at sea all the time, and it's cheap enough to where everyone can get it. So there are inherent drawbacks to that. But again, also, when my rig came down, Starlink helped save my life. The fact that I had Wi-Fi, I was primarily, because we're all on cell phones from different countries with different numbers, we were all on WhatsApp. So it was me and the Argentinian Navy and the freight ship. Once we got in touch with them after 11 hours, the freight ship, the US authorities, the race promoter, we were all in like a WhatsApp group chat. And like being on the internet, man, it's hard to beat that. If you're using an EPIRB, all they know is you have a problem at that location and they know who you are, but they don't know what's going on. A sat phone is one step up from that, but being fully connected is 10 steps up from that. And I mean, and you can say, yeah, it's gonna work great until it doesn't. And I had 2 sat phones and I had a tracker. I had several other ways. I had like at least 4 backups for Starlink, but those would have been more text or voice only. Whereas Starlink was full internet and it never failed. It always works. So.
You said you lost all your repair gear early on in the race. What was maybe your most creative redneck quick repair, maybe a quick fix that you didn't have the right tool on board?
That's a good question. So fortunately, I did not like structurally break the boat, so I didn't really need, in hindsight, most of the things I lost in my repair kit. But there was one little oversight that the boat always had some acetone on board. We kept on using the acetone, and I didn't have much acetone at all when I started the race, which was a bit of an oversight because we kept buying acetone and we kept using it because we were applying all these decals and everything else. but I had to raid my medical kit and use all the alcohol rub wipes to do sail repairs. So I was like, I had no alcohol rub wipes or any rubbing alcohol at all because I used it all in sail repair out of the med kit. Yeah, but the reality was I was pretty well prepared for most stuff, but I lost a lot of the repair stuff in the autopilot computer. But every day, and I think Bruce can probably second this, but every day you're out there, you're just figuring out what your problems are and trying to improvise them. But again, the better prepared you can be, the better off you're going to be. And usually the best prepared boat is going to win the race. I think that's probably what happened in this race too.
How'd you fix the through hole? How'd you fix the through hole that the water's coming in?
You mean? Oh, so what happened was when the water, like the motor, the diesel motor, pumps raw water in and cools the motor with raw water, and then it goes back out the exhaust. So once it left the motor, it was a rubber tube, and then it went to a long fiberglass tube in the back of the boat, and then it went out the back. That was for the exhaust. Well, right before the start of the race, we installed another entirely different hydraulic drive that would drive the tiller. So we could hook that drive to an autopilot computer if everything else failed. So we added another entire autopilot drive. And when we did that autopilot drive, the back of that drive was in the same location as the fiberglass tube for the exhausts. So we cut that fiberglass tube and did another rubber hose to go around it. And one of those hose clamps did not get all the way tightened down. And so a few days out, the back of the boat was sinking because the hose clamp came off that wasn't all the way tightened down.
Is that retighten it?
Yes. I had to retighten it, and then I had to clean up the worst mess of my entire life, and it was really unfortunate. But and that's one of those moments where you're like, again, there were so many things where I was like, I really wish I had more time and money to prepare. Like things were getting done to the boat by other people even, volunteers even, and get on them, thank you so much for helping out. But things were getting done by people other than myself the day before the race. And it was just, that was the nature of the campaign from start to finish. I mean, without Shipyard, I wouldn't have even been on the starting line. But even at the last minute, with some support, it was such an effort every single day just to make the starting line. And so some things were not ideally prepared. Most of the problems I had were 110% due to not enough time and money, and would have been solved with more of either more time or more money, just to be better prepared. So a lot of lessons were learned, some the hard way. But they should all make me stronger going forward, I hope.
Thank God you're here. Thank God Bruce made it back safe. 04, I started to go out of the harbor. I said he'd never make it back. We're trying to do a group photo in front of the bar on the way out with Bruce and you in front with Marissa, Ronnie. That's what we're thinking about, right?
Yeah, totally.
All right, so on the way out, we're trying to gather here, do a group photo, and wish you well for Vendée 4 to 8 years from now.
Yeah, 2028.
2028.
This is so nostalgic.
Thanks so much for coming, guys, and thanks so much for following along.